only looking. So far, potential Republican presidential candidates visiting Iowa are saying they're just visiting. Among them, former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. We're questioning him on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation,
Iowa Bankers Association. Iowa banks provide financial services to meet the needs of families, farms, and businesses. More information is available online at myiowabank.com. Iowa Banks, your future, our focus.
the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure. Iowa Community Foundations, an initiative of the Iowa Council of Foundations, connecting donors to the causes and communities they care about, for good, for Iowa, forever. Details at iowacommunityfoundations.org. Iowa's private colleges and universities, enrolling 25% of the total Iowa higher education enrollment and conferring 44% of the baccalaureate and 40% of the graduate degrees in the state. More information is available at www.thinkindependently.com.
Iowa's hospitals provide jobs to 74,000 Iowans and have a $6.1 billion impact to the state's economy. Read more at www.ihaonline.org. The Iowa Hospital Association. We care about Iowa's health.
Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, February 25 edition of Iowa Press. Here is Dean Borg.
Political seasons don't always align with a calendar. For example, Iowa's 2012 presidential caucuses are on the calendar for less than a year from now, but the Republican would-be candidates are seemingly a bit tardy in getting campaigns underway. But candidates set their own calendars. Pennsylvania's former U.S. Congressman and Senator Rick Santorum is among those considered to be potential Republican candidates. He was 32 years old when first elected to Congress in 1990. After 2 terms in the House, he served 12 years in the Senate. And he's making his 10th Iowa visit since the 2008 general election. We've asked him to spend some time with us here at the Iowa Press table today. Welcome to Iowa Press.
Thank you, Dean. Good to be with you.
And across the Iowa Press table, 2 of Iowa's top political reporters, the AP's Mike Glover and Radio Iowa's Kay Henderson.
Senator, President Obama shifted his position a bit yesterday on the Defense of Marriage Act and same-sex marriage. What's your take on that?
Well, first time, Mike. Good to be with you again. Obviously very disappointed. The president, when he was campaigning, was very clear about his support for a bill that passed with over 90 votes in the United States Senate, was signed by President Clinton, which did something very basic, which was that states would not be bullied into changing their marriage law by other states, and mostly other state courts, like what happened here in Iowa. Right. That state courts wouldn't impose marriage on one state and then litigators from that state then go to other states to force them to recognize Iowa's marriage law or Massachusetts marriage law. So this was a way for the federal government to preserve the sovereignty of the states. And it was a way of being sort of neutral on the issue of marriage. Instead of favoring one side over the other, let the people decide. And what President Obama has done is, in a 2-year period of time, he went from finding this law to be perfectly fine and constitutional to finding it to be somehow unconstitutional, even though, to my knowledge, the language of the Constitution hasn't changed any in the last 2 years, yet his interpretation of it has. Right. And I think it's driven by politics, not by any real change in the Constitution.
Sure, and you issued a statement harshly critical of the president at the time that he acted, but there has been sort of a strange silence from a lot of potential Republican presidential candidates. I haven't heard much from a lot of them. Why not? Why haven't I heard more?
Look, I mean, all I can say is that you know, if we do not, as a party and as a people, stand behind the institution of marriage and understand its essential role as the glue that holds the family together, the family, the building block of society, you know, the first economy, the first school, the first place where children's character is formed, and we are going to destine our children and destine the future of this country for a lower standard of living and a less free and prosperous
country.
country.
We hear more from the other potential candidates? Would you ask them to address the issue?
All I can say is I have spoken loudly and will continue to speak loudly, and if others choose not to, then I think they have to, you know, take the pluses and minuses in not doing so. But I am going to be and have been a vocal supporter of traditional marriage. I believe it's essential. I'm not surprised. In the Iowa elections, as you know, there were 3 justices up for retention. Retention. I'm sorry, I couldn't find the word. Thank you, Dean. Up for retention the last election, and of the potential Republican candidates, I was the only one that came into the state, jumped on the judge bus, talked about the issue of having people decide what marriage laws should be, not courts, and no other Republican potential nominee or candidate came in to do the same. So I think it shows that there are some people who are willing to stand up and fight for the family, and others who would rather, to use the comment of one potential candidate, call a truce on these things. Well, a truce in this case means ceding ground to the other side.
How do you think this issue will play out in the Iowa caucus campaign in the contest among you and other candidates?
Obviously, the issue of marriage is an important one. Never before in the history of Iowa, I've been told, were judges up for retention thrown out, and in this case, all 3 of them thrown out. It's clear why they were thrown out. It's because they abused their position and imposed a novel meaning of marriage on the Constitution.
But do you think in 2012, whenever the Iowa caucuses may be, that Iowa Republicans will go into those meetings and vote for a candidate based on this issue?
I think it will be a factor, just like the jobs bill. I mean, the jobs issue will be a factor, just like national security will be a factor. But I think it will be an important factor. It's a relevant issue, obviously, in this state, and I think it's an important issue for our country in understanding how essential it is to have strong families and marriage being the glue that holds that family together.
For Republicans in the general election in 2012, is it a relevant issue of contrast with President Obama? Do you think it will be a motivating factor for voters in 2012, November?
Obviously, here in Iowa, it was a motivating factor. In other states where there have been fights on marriage, 31 states have had referendums on the issue of marriage, and those who supported traditional marriage have won 31 out of 31. So it is a motivating factor. It's a debate that is worth having. I think one of the reasons that it's won in all 31 states, including states like California and Maine, is because once the debate happens, people begin to see the ramifications to society writ large of what a change in the marriage laws will mean, what it means to education, what it means to people's religious freedom, what it means to churches and what they can preach. All of these things then come into focus, and we realize this isn't just a harmful thing that affects people that we want to be kind to. And I certainly want to be kind, and if people want to love somebody else, they're perfectly free to love whoever they want to love. It's different, though, if you're asking us to change the law about marriage, and the impact of changing that law is on our schools, on our children's education, and on our religious institutions.
Is there a political risk to you in taking this position on same-sex marriage, and maybe a reason some of the other candidates have been less vocal? I've seen some polling suggesting that for people under 40, this is a loser of an issue, and that it doesn't motivate people in the overall universe.
Mike and Kay, Dean, I'm sure you've looked at my political resume, and I think you've looked at the issues that I've taken on in the 16 years I was in public life, and I don't think anyone would accuse me of looking at the polls and determining what positions I fight for. I look at what I think is in the best interest of the future of our country, and it is clear to me that the best interest of the future of our country is that we have strong marriages and strong families, and we raise children in the best possible atmosphere for those children to be raised, and that is highlighting and supporting a child being raised by a mother and a father. That's the ideal place. Can children be raised in a different environment? Yes. But we want to do what's best for children, and what's best for children by any measure, And even the left now admits this. Scientifically, social science work, children raised in two-parents' homes with moms and dads do better. And so as a society, it is in our interest to encourage that. And I think by redefining marriage, we don't encourage it, we discourage it.
Men and women and their supporters of public employee unions are on the streets around the state capitol in our neighboring state of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
What's your assessment of what's going on there?
My assessment is that if you look at where the problem is in the state and even more so in local governments, and one of the reasons you see Governor Walker drawing the line on this whole collective bargaining issue, is that the big problem facing these communities is the fact that they have exorbitant pay packages for state and local governments. And if you look at the average state employee, average local employee, what they get all in, benefits, pensions, etc., their wages and benefit packages far exceed the people who actually pay for those wages and benefits, which is the average taxpayer.
You support what the governor and the Republican-dominated legislature want to do?
Well, they have to, yes. The answer in a short and sweet, yes, I support what they're doing, because what they're doing is trying to bring a budget deficit down without destroying the economy of the state by raising taxes. They have to keep the state competitive. They have, if you look at a very substantial area of the budget, is pay and benefits for state employees, and those benefits are out of line with the rest of the people in the state. And so what we're saying is not, we're going to cut you below, we're going to actually just make you make some little sacrifice and pay some for your health care, pay some contributions to your pensions, and we want to give the state wants to give the municipalities, through these reforms of the collective bargaining process, the ability to do the same when it comes to municipal employees.
This could become contagious, however, to other states and to the federal government.
I hope so.
Okay, thanks.
There are a few Republicans who are expressing some concerns, though, that it might be overreaching. Are you concerned that the governor of Wisconsin and other governors who are contemplating these sorts of actions may be overreaching? No,
I think what was overreaching was Governor Culver, before he left office, and granting a huge pay increase and benefit package to the state employees here in Iowa. That's overreaching. What's not overreaching is saying that to the average person in Wisconsin, you get paid X amount for being a carpenter, but if you work for the state and you do carpentry work at the state, you're going to be paid 25 or 30% more, plus a benefit package which is 40 or 50% more generous than the one that you get, and even including private sector union comparisons. That is out of whack. Why? Because we had elected officials who didn't have any skin in the game. It wasn't their money that they were negotiating to give to these public sector unions. Remember, public sector unions didn't exist until John F. Kennedy in 1962, through an executive order, created the ability for these public sector unions to exist on the federal level. This is a relatively new thing. And folks, as to the left, as Franklin Roosevelt said, that these public sector unions cannot exist, that it's improper for them to exist.
There were folks who were protesting at the Iowa Capitol this past week who said they're unconstitutional. Do you think public sector unions are unconstitutional?
I'm not too sure. I haven't studied that issue, so I'm not going to comment on whether it's unconstitutional. I think it is unwise to put a situation in place where you already have worker protections. Look, my grandfather was an immigrant to this country. He came here and in 1930 went into the coal mines of western Pennsylvania. He stayed in those coal mines, in the deep mines, till he was 72 years old. My grandfather was a union organizer, was the treasurer of his local mine worker, and he was absolutely right in doing so, because what was going on there was horrendous. The working conditions were horrendous, the pay was horrendous, the benefits were horrendous, and unions were needed. And in the private sector, there still should be private sector unions. That's not the case with public employees. They have protections built into law. There's civil service protections at every single state in the union. There's, well, I don't know, maybe every single state. Certainly are on the federal level. And there are worker protections in every state. Now, the bottom line is there is an inequity in bargaining power because the unions have a stake in the game. It's their money that they're going to receive. It's their benefits, where the person negotiating for the taxpayer isn't their money. And as a result of that inequality of bargaining position, the unions have done better, and the people who pay are the taxpayers, and the deficits that are accrued are the problems of that,
in politics and in government, we're often governed by the law of unintended consequences. There are those who suggest that part of what this has done has given the labor movement, which was kind of moribund, in recent years, a new jolt of energy and something to rally about. There was talk of a rally up at the State House, and there was. It was a large, noisy rally. Have you given organized labor a shot of energy?
I think most people who look at what's going on in the state capitals right now and seeing the behavior of the people who are paid far beyond what the person who does a similar job in the private sector gets paid is not giving them a jolt of support across the country. It may give a jolt of support among the rank and file, but the bottom line is, particularly with respect to teachers in Wisconsin, what you see are poor results and higher pay. And I don't think that gives a big jolt in support of labor unions when it looks like teachers care about one thing. They care about their money and their benefits. They don't care about quality education and serving students, and are having doctors give fake excuses for them to miss work. I don't think that's to the benefit of the labor unions.
Some have been a bit surprised at President Obama's reaction to what's going on in Wisconsin and Ohio now by not commenting too much publicly, saying more about what's going on in Egypt and Libya than the demonstrations in Wisconsin.
Well, the only comment I saw was one favorable to the unions and the protesters, and I was not surprised by that. I mean, look, this is a president who is a big beneficiary of public sector union largesse. I mean, not only do public sector unions get good pay and benefits packages, but they also get dues from the people that that are employed by the state. They take these dues to go back and lobby the state for even more money. So, I mean, you have taxpayers paying money to the state governments and the federal government. That money goes to labor unions to go back and lobby for the taxpayers to pay even more money to the very people. This is classic how the Democrats have gained and accessed power, and I think it's exposing this deep underbelly of this soft underbelly of the Democrats and how they've maintained and grown power in America.
I'd like to shift gears to another issue, but before I do, this is your 10th visit to the state of recent years.
Nice round number.
Yeah, exactly. and Dean, at the beginning of the program, said you were a potential presidential candidate. Would you like to use this statewide forum as an opportunity to declare your candidacy?
Yeah, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity that you've just given me. But I'm still in that process.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like. I don't feel like I'm being rushed or pushed, other than by reporter questions, into making this decision. And I'm going to continue walking through that process for a while longer.
How long is it going to take?
Until I make a decision as to whether there's sufficient support for me as a candidate, as opposed to someone who is out there articulating the issues and trying to add to clarity to the choices that we have between the existing administration and some different one, Republican
I interrupted you,
administration.
Kate.
You have talked about your knowledge of Iowa issues in regards to the retention election and some other things along the way here over the past few minutes. There is an abortion debate brewing among Republicans at the Iowa House of Representatives. You were involved in passage of a partial birth abortion ban at the national level. There are Republicans at the State House who don't want to vote for a half measure.
Right.
They only want to vote for a full measure. Mm-hmm. What is your advice to them?
My advice to them is I've always appreciated the passion of folks who don't want to compromise and are really focused on the idea that unless we hold out for something that is what we want to do, every sort of intermediate step undermines the ability to get where we ultimately want to go. I think that's a legitimate debate. But I would say that I have taken the position that any incremental change gives us the opportunity to focus on this issue and talk about the horror that is abortion and talk about the humanity of the child in the womb. And so if we have an opportunity, like with partial birth abortion, to demonstrate that the child is a child, because in the partial birth abortion, which we debated for 8 years in Washington, D.C., a child post 20 weeks was delivered all but the head. Here's a baby with arms, legs, etc., and is in the hands of the doctor alive, and then is killed as the doctor puts forceps through the base of the skull. And some would say, well, that didn't do anything to really reduce the number of abortions, but what it did was focus the American public's attention on the reality of what abortion is. And so I would say to those who would say, well, but it didn't get us to the end. I'm not too sure you can get to the end without walking America through, for example, that children in the womb feel pain, at 20 weeks, and that's an important element of understanding, fetal development, and that this really is a child in the womb.
But they also argue that that's tacit approval then of abortions before 20
I think,
weeks.
well, it isn't if you make it clear that it isn't. And obviously, I think one of the things that I think most of the sponsors of the bill have said, and certainly they have in Nebraska, where this came from, and other states that have passed this, that this is not an admission that children before 20 weeks, are not human beings and are not entitled to constitutional rights, but that, here is a demonstrated thing that we can push the court. And again, this is an opportunity to go to the court who got it wrong in Roe versus Wade and push them to reconsider. And maybe through the process of this bill, they may reconsider a bigger piece. Of course, they don't have to just decide on this. They can actually consider Roe versus Wade overall. So there could be an opportunity here to do more than actually the bill suggests.
This issue has dogged you in the past. When you first started coming to Iowa, commercials were run against you, accusing you of being a pro-life fraud because you had supported Arlen Specter and Christy Todd Whitman. Right. How do you defend that?
Well, I supported Christy Todd Whitman over a guy by the name of Jim McGreevey, who some now know, who got thrown out of office. He actually became governor of New Jersey later on and was one of the most radical, pro-abortion folks that we've seen, in not only in Jersey and in the country. In the case of Arlen Specter, I made a prudential judgment. We were at a 51-49 majority in the United States Senate at the time that Specter was up for re-election. President Bush was up for re-election in 2004, and we knew that there would be 2 to 3 Supreme Court nominees that would be coming forward in the next 4 to 6 years under 4 years under President Bush. And I made a decision that if Senator Specter would be willing, who would then, if he got reelected, would be chairman of the Judiciary Committee, would be willing to support the president's nominees and fight for those nominees, no matter who they were, if they were, qualified, obviously, but as far as their positions on the issues, then I would feel comfortable, because Senator Specter was, as you know, he was the person who borked Bork. He was the guy who was, on the Republican side, the linchpin as to whether a conservative actually passes the Senate or not. So with Specter's support, I knew that any Bush nominee would be able to pass the United States Senate. And to me, a Supreme Court justice for 20, 30, 40 years was more important than a United States senator who may or may not win. As you know, I mean, just because Pat Toomey would have won the primary didn't mean he'd win the general. I believe that the Supreme Court was the more important objective there.
Senator, U.S. markets, the economy is beginning now to react to what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied with President Obama's handling of what's the turmoil in the Middle East?
I am very disappointed not only with his handling of the conflict in the Middle East, but what led to that situation in the Middle East. I mean, you had a president who came into office, who campaigned here in Iowa, that President Bush's idea of promoting a freedom and promoting more economic and political freedom in authoritarian regimes around the world, not just in the Middle East, but around the world, was a wrong-headed idea. Said he would not follow the Bush doctrine. And in fact, his first trip was to go to Cairo and talk about how, we were going to take hands off, use international organization, invited the Muslim Brotherhood to a speech in Cairo. We were not against anybody. We're for anybody doing anything they want. And so what happened was he set a place for a vacuum that America was not going to be involved, and it was not going to take Mubarak and say, you need more political openness, you need more economic opportunities. He said, we're going to leave it alone. We're going to take the position of stability as opposed to moving a more pro-democratic or, more importantly, pro-freedom agenda. The result of that is when a revolution occurred in Iran, the president decided to do nothing. In fact, he decided to support the ruling regime, the theocracy in Iran that was at war, has been at war and has been killing American soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. He supported that regime against a pro-democracy revolution in the country of Iran. 18 months later, in Egypt, the same situation occurred with riots in the street. In this case, though, we had a friend of the United States, not a sworn enemy, as in Iran, but a friend of the United States. And so what did the president do? Did he side with our friend, just like he sided with the enemy leadership in Iran? No. He took the side of the demonstrators and said Mubarak has to go. Now move to Libya. Here's another sworn enemy of the United States, someone who's attacked the United States. Has he sided with the protesters in the streets? No. In fact, he's been pretty ambivalent about this issue. So here you have a situation where the president has sent a message to our friends, dictator and democracy alike, that if you get in trouble, don't count on us. And by the way, he said to our enemies, like in Iraq and Libya, if you get in trouble, we'll be okay with you. We'll side with you. This earns the enmity of our enemies, because they have contempt for us, that we are a toothless tiger, and it says to our friends, you can't trust us.
Speaking of earning things, do you need to earn victory in the Iowa caucuses in order to avoid being accused of being a toothless candidate for president?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think it's way too early to determine that. I'm not a candidate yet, and we have no idea what the field looks like. I mean, look, I think expectations are rather low for someone like me entering into the race. I'm seeing it 1% in most of the state, national, everything. So, my feeling is go out, deliver the message, talk about what our country needs going forward, and then let's sort of see what happens.
South Dakota Sen. John Thune announced recently that he's not going to be running for the Republican nomination. Many thought he would be an ideal candidate. In making that announcement, he said that a campaign against President Obama will be a difficult campaign, a tough campaign. What's your assessment of Obama's status? Will he be a tough nut for Republicans to crack?
Well, I think any incumbent president's always tough, particularly with the resources and the mainstream media support that he's going to have. I mean, I don't think there's any question he'll be tough. But we need to make this campaign about the future of our country and the direction. Do you want a country that government's going to continue to increase in size and do more for you and move toward this big nanny state, or do you want a country that believes in you and is going to give more freedom and opportunity and restore the constitutional form of government that we've had and created the greatest country in the history of the world?
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. We're out of time.
Please do.
Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Dean.
On our next edition of Iowa Press, we'll be talking with the man credited with founding the Iowa Tea Party, Ryan Rhodes. He's currently co-chairing Iowa's Tea Party. That's next weekend. And then get this, because of festival programming, only Friday night at 7:30. I'm Dean Borg. Thanks for joining us today.
Archive editions of Iowa Press can be accessed on the World Wide Web. Audio and video streaming is available, as are transcripts, at www.iptv.org.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation,
Iowa Bankers Association. Iowa banks provide financial services to meet the needs of families, farms, and businesses. More information is available online at myiowabank.com. Iowa Banks, your future, our focus.
the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure. Iowa Community Foundations, an initiative of the Iowa Council of Foundations, connecting donors to the causes and communities they care about, for good, for Iowa, forever. Details at iowacommunityfoundations.org. Iowa's private colleges and universities, enrolling 25% of the total Iowa higher education enrollment and conferring 44% of the baccalaureate and 40% of the graduate degrees in the state. More information is available at www.thinkindependently.com.
Iowa's hospitals provide jobs to 74,000 Iowans and have a $6.1 billion impact to the state's economy. Read more at www.ihaonline.org. The Iowa Hospital Association. We care about Iowa's health.